showers for more than 90 seconds a day, limitations on how many times you can flush and even wash your hands. That is how people in Cape Town, South Africa have been living for the last several months in a desperate bid to push back day zero as far as possible. Day zero is the day Cape Town runs dry. That means no running water. It's been pushed to the 9th of July from 4th of June earlier, thanks to efforts of conservation made by city residents and a huge push from civic authorities. So how do people grapple with this in their daily life? To speak on this, I'm joined now by John Viljoen of Bloomberg News, who's also a resident of Cape Town and has written about his experience in great detail. John, thank you for speaking with us. When I went through your piece, the first thought was, how did you get used to this? What is your daily life like with a cap of 50 liters of water per person?
Well, it's amazing how quickly you get used to the new routines. We've fitted into this new system of showering, standing over a basin when we shower, catching that water and then pouring it out into buckets after our 90-second shower, as you described. That water then goes into the toilet. If there's a bit left over, we put it into what's left of our garden. So it's really amazing how adaptable people can be and how quickly you change and get used to a new situation.
You've put up a lot of pictures as part of your piece on those conservation efforts. What were the biggest challenges of getting used to using less water?
Yeah, I think it's making adjustments to washing laundry. You know, you have to put clothes on the quickest cycle you can find. So maybe you're not always that happy with the way things come out at the other end. You know, you have to do some washing in the shower quickly. I think the biggest sacrifice for a lot of people has been giving up on things like swimming pools. Across the city of ours, you'll see lots of swimming pools that are looking really grim and green and half full, where the water has evaporated and you're not allowed to fill up your swimming pool. It's against the law. And obviously people's gardens have suffered tremendously. A lot of Cape Townians are very proud of their gardens, but these days, if you drive around the suburbs, you'll see brown grass. And a lot of my friends actually decided to give up on the grass and actually putting in fake lawns. So that's quite a good option. It looks good, it looks nice and green and lush.
You mentioned that the limit is 50 liters per person per day, but you've managed to bring it down. You and your family have managed to bring it down to 30 liters per person per day. What kind of everyday sacrifices does that entail? Can you wash your hands after every meal? How do you make sure everything is clean and hygienic? What does it really mean in terms of little adjustments?
Yes, hygiene is obviously a big concern. So we do wash our hands often, of course, but whereas in the past you might have just let that water flow down the plug hole, now you wash your hands over a little basin perhaps and catch the water so you can use it again. Also, you've got to be really careful when you brush your teeth to catch that water. The biggest sacrifice, I suppose, has been around the toilet. You know, you're so used to always flushing your toilet after every use. But as we say here in Cape Town, if it's yellow, let it mellow, and we flush far less frequently. That's probably for many people the biggest adjustment, especially in the work environment. Like you can imagine an office situation or a school, that's when it gets really interesting.
I wonder, has everyone been as participative in this conservation drive? Does everyone, the rich, the poor, the middle class, pitch in as much? Or is there a difference for the ones who can perhaps afford more water? Is that a situation as well, or is it very evenly distributed right now?
No, I think that's a good question. I think for some of the richest people in the city, not everyone has bought into the saving regime. I think some of the wealthiest people here have simply sunk boreholes so they can drill for water on their own property and then use that water to do the things that they need to do. So they perhaps haven't felt the impact. a lot of Cape Townians have really done well in saving. Although the city wants us to use 450 million litres of water a day, we're still using 523 million litres, so we're still using more than we should. Also, I would just like to mention that for many of the poorer people in Cape Town, the way that I'm living now and being inconvenienced is their reality for their lives. It's how every day is really for many of the poorest people in Cape Town. So perhaps there hasn't been as big an adjustment required there.
What does it do to your social experience and in the way people react with each other, knowing that day zero is coming? It may have been pushed back, but you don't know if the winter rains will be fine. You don't know if everyone's playing their part. What does it do to people who live together in that pressure as a society?
Yes, you do feel there's a lot of anger when you hear about people who aren't observing the restrictions. So if you drive past somebody who's got a lovely green lawn, you're very suspicious of how they manage that. People do post on social media if they see people not following the rules. In fact, the city also puts out a map which shows individual houses and their water consumption. So you can actually track houses. They're color coded to see who's actually reduce their water use. It does create a bit of tension. There are certainly certainly been some difficult social situations. I know we're at one of the natural springs in the city where people are queuing. Tensions have run high at times, and city security officials have said that there's been a few altercations and fisticuffs, people fighting over their place in the queue and fighting over the water collection.
You know, large parts of India and people living there in a city like Mumbai, where I'm speaking to you from, we're no strangers to water shortages. But sometimes there's a huge difference in those who have and those who have not, in terms of how much you suffer. Do you think it's a more egalitarian situation in Cape Town, where civic authorities are making sure that everyone does their part?
Yes, I think this has been, well, put it this way, I think it's been a big leveler. I mean, so like I was saying earlier, for me, living in a very nice part of Cape Town, in a relatively nice house, I'm now having to do things that people in perhaps the poorer area do quite routinely. So I think it's been a good leveler, and the city is trying to treat everyone fairly. We're all being asked to do our bit. And in fact, if day zero does come, and we hope it won't, but if it does come, we will all have to queue up at 200 collection points around the city, and that's just going to be a tremendous shock to most of the population here. But luckily, the very poorest of the poor in Cape Town will be spared that. They will still have their normal centralized water supplies in those areas, which are often not very developed and characterized by informal housing.
You know what's very fascinating, John, about your entire account is how this seems like a dystopian future, but it's something that people are actually experiencing. What's your greatest learning from what you have experienced and you can share with us?
I would think the greatest learning definitely is how much water we waste. First of all, let's try and use water twice whenever we use water. And the second thing I would say is that I will never go back to using the water the way I did before. I haven't personally had a bath for 4 months, and I can't imagine feeling comfortable having a lovely long bath again, but perhaps I will one day. But definitely the biggest learning has been to appreciate water and to realize how much of it we simply let run through our fingers.
Thank you, John, for sharing your story with us. The reason Cape Town's experience is being watched so closely the world over is because it could happen elsewhere too. The BBC recently published a list of cities that were most likely to run out of drinking water by 2030, and Bengaluru has made it to that list of 11 cities at number 2. Climate change, population growth are some of the reasons that will push the demand for fresh groundwater past supply by 40% by the year 2030. The report also says that not a single lake in Bengaluru has water fit for either drinking or bathing. Is Bengaluru ready to take steps today to avoid a possible grim future? To speak on this, I'm joined by Veena Srinivasan, Fellow at the Center for Environment and Development at ATRI, and S. Vishwanath, Advisor at BioMe. Thank you so much for speaking with us this evening. Ms. Veena, you have obviously seen the BBC listing. Is it really that bad right now? Because there are a lot of people who turn around and say that, hey, we are making efforts to make sure that Bengaluru does not go through a situation where we run out of drinking water.
Right. Well, thanks for asking that question. I think those two things are not mutually exclusive, because BWSSB is indeed doing a lot of things, but Bangalore is also growing at a rate that's unprecedented anywhere else in the world. And it's really hard for any utility, I defy any utility anywhere in the world, to be able to keep up with this pace of growth. So I would argue that even if we are taking steps, that doesn't mean that we won't run out of water at some point in the future. We do need to worry, because we're talking about a doubling of population from our current position to 2030 as per the current revised master plan. So I think there are things we can do, but there's also cause for concern that we aren't doing enough fast enough.
Mr. Srinivasan, one of the key reasons which is always cited for the pollution of Bengaluru's lakes, we hear stories on and off about, lakes catching fire. This report says that it's the water in them is not fit for even bathing or drinking. One of the key reasons is the rampant development. Has there been any effort, in your view, to balance the growth of the city with its natural resources? Because at the end of the day, that is the challenge.
Well, there is an awareness, but there's plenty little that we can do anything about it. All we can do is to increase the supply side and manage the demand, and look at alternative sources of water to cater to the demands of this economy as well as this population. And I think efforts are on. They could gather more pace, but to predict a gloom and doom scenario is, I think, a tad unjustified.
Okay, why would you say it's unjustified? Because that list has 11 cities on it. Bengaluru is the only urban Indian city on that list right now. You're seeing what is happening in Cape Town. Perhaps a decade ago, if people told them this is going to happen, they would have thought not really. Why would you think it's unjustified to prepare for the worst?
Well, for one, Bangalore city is completely dependent on the Kaveri. That's a cause for worry. But the fact is that we're only taking about 7% of the allocation for Karnataka from the Kaveri River. And there are 4 dams or reservoirs, major ones, upstream of Bangalore city, which makes sure that water is stocked and is available for the city. We're pumping in about 1,400 million liters per day from these 4 reservoirs. And as of now, the position is that in these reservoirs, there's enough water for 14 months. And they're going to get topped up in June and July. Another 775 million liters per day will kick in from 2023. So we're broadly assured of 2,200 million liters per day of water from the Kaveri. The city is not going to run out of water. It's going to face water scarcity.
Ms. Veena, would you agree that the gloom and doom is a little maybe hyped, and the situation of Bengaluru is perhaps not the same as other places?
Well, I think what does happen is these gloom and doom scenarios are calls for action. The very fact that we are doing this kind of an interview, I don't think if we sat back and did nothing, we would. If we sat back and did nothing, we are going to face a crisis. But I think that, and I do agree with Vishwanath largely in the sense that people are doing stuff. We just need to do more and faster. The only one point that I would like to slightly emphasize is that for many people in Bangalore, 0 day is already here. So large parts of the city don't get pipe supply at all. So when we were talking about 0 day in Cape Town, we're talking about a situation where they stop receiving pipe supply. And the largest part of Bangalore, all of the newly added suburbs are completely groundwater dependent already. So 0 day is already here for us in a sense. And really what we are trying to avert is something which is much worse than 0 day, which is that we not only run out of pipe supply, we run out of groundwater as well. So I do think that every bit of awareness that we are building that we can do helps. There are a lot of things that we're doing that are not useful, and there are a lot of laws that do need to change. Vishwanath already pointed out that we get a fairly small fraction of the Kaveri supply. But I think that one thing that we haven't thought about in India is how do we kind of have adjustments to that Kaveri allocation, maybe by compensating farmers in some way in really dry years or something else, which doesn't only always involve large infrastructure projects. We haven't explored the full range of what are called soft options. So I think there's a lot we can do. I wouldn't say that we should sit back and relax and not worry about a Cape Town happening. I wouldn't say that people should sit up at night and worry about it yet either. So I think we need to pull up our socks and work as hard as we can.
What does pull up our socks really mean on an individual level? And that's really the question, because right now we're talking about the supply side. We're not really talking about how people are treating water. And that's one very clear thing that came out of the interview I did right before this with a Bloomberg reporter who lives in Cape Town, where they're talking about 90-second showers. They're talking about, ration flushes in the loo. They have to use dry shampoo to wash their hair. Today, Vishwanath, we're not in that situation, but is there even a fraction of that awareness among people?
Well, look, the awareness will actually come when the pricing of water sends the right signals. As Veena pointed out, the issue is not one of resource availability right now, but it's access to the resource. It's sound water for all. That is what we should focus on, expanding the network, getting this water supply to everybody. An average Bangalorean household gets water twice a week for about 2 hours. Where can they waste or splurge? It's true that a certain section of the population does that, but that's not a major challenge or a major issue for now. The city has made rainwater harvesting mandatory. Citizens should stand up and start to implement these rainwater harvesting measures. The city has also tried to focus on wastewater recycling for apartments more than 50, layouts more than 50 in number. The city should start to focus and incentivize these things to kick in. These are all steps that are necessary, but not necessarily in a panic mode. This list of 11 cities throws you into a tizzy. And you know what the response will be? The response will be to ship water from 340 kilometers away. And the state will turn around and say, you told us that the city is running out of water, so we're going to get it from the Sharavati reservoir.
Okay. Veena, what would you like to add to that? I agree that not a panic mode, but when they're talking about 2030, today is the day we need to talk about what to do to avoid this at an individual level, at a society level, at a civic body level. And are enough of those conversations happening in and around Bengaluru? Or are those restricted, say, to a group of environmentalists and intellectuals like yourselves?
Right. No, I think those are great questions. I do think that the citizenry in Bangalore is very concerned. And one of the places that you see a lot of citizen action is around lakes. So a lot of citizens kind of feel helpless. They would really like to do a lot more, but they also feel that some of these issues are just too big and outside of their control. So there's a couple of different things that citizens can do, I think, at an individual level. And the first thing I would like to emphasize is, as Vishwanath said, there are rainwater harvesting regulations and there are decentralized wastewater treatment regulations. They aren't being poorly implemented, and the first thing that every citizen can do is to make sure that if the regulations apply to them, they should make sure that they take action within their apartment complexes and ensure that the wastewater treatment plant works. They're testing the water, and then the rainwater harvesting system is not just a paper tiger, but it's something that actually functions. So that's the first thing citizens can do. The second thing citizens can do, I think, is really think very carefully about outdoor water use. one of the things that we talk about when we're talking about saving waters, we always talk about the shorter showers and the turning off the taps, and those are good. We need to worry about those. But those end up as wastewater, and because Bangalore is not on the coast, they get used by somebody downstream. A much bigger cause of concern is the complete replacement of the tree cover in Bangalore with a landscaped cover, which is all irrigated. And so you have a huge amount of outdoor water use in terms of lawns, in terms of just these flower patches, which all need to be irrigated all of the time. If you look at other droughts, whether it was a recent drought in California or in as well as in South Africa, one of the biggest places where water savings happened was by cutting back on outdoor water use and letting the landscapes dry out for that year. And I think one of the things that Bangaloreans just don't talk about in the context of water use is really thinking about what they're doing with gardens, and do we really need to have a hose pipe which is watering their lawn right before the rain, for example. So there's a lot that can be done in terms of cutting back on water use, but I would just urge, don't only think about indoor water use, think about outdoor water use as well. The third bit, I think that citizens are already involved in lakes, but I think that citizens really need to think very carefully about what we do with the water that ends up in lakes. So right now, the paradigm of management of water in lakes is that the lakes are there for us to jog around, to appreciate, to watch the birds. They contribute to water security to the extent that they recharge groundwater. But we've seen from a lot of lakes that as the lake gets older, the recharge rate slightly goes down over time. But otherwise, they're pretty much just pretty bodies, and we don't do any pretty water bodies that we do nothing more with. And I think one of the things that we need to think about is there any way that we can completely integrate the water in lakes, which is really treated wastewater that's ending up in these lakes, back into our pipe system in some way. So we don't have to go to Sharavati, Hemavati, Netravati to get water, but if we can recirculate some of that water using the lakes as an integral part of the city's water supply system, then that's something that we can do. And that's something that the lake groups, which are very, very active, can really lobby for over time.
All right.
So I think these are three things that citizens can do on an individual basis.
Sure. The one upside is that there is a lot of citizen awareness in Bengaluru around water conservation. But will the garden city be willing to give up their lush lawns? I don't know. Perhaps not before a crisis is upon us. Yes, Vishwanath wants to come in.
Yeah, well, let's not take away the pleasure of a bit of water use. We don't have to load it with so much morality and make everything a guilt trip. Swimming, a bit of gardens, a bit of greenery is all welcome. The city can afford that. All the savings will be in nominal percentages. I think crucially, we'll have to look at the big ticket numbers. And as Veena rightly pointed out, we'll have to look at treated wastewater as a way of getting back into the system. And there are examples like in Jagpur Lake and Rajenhalli Lake, where treated wastewater comes through a constructed wetland, fills the lake, recharges the groundwater, and then becomes available to the citizens as drinking water almost. So I think those kind of examples need to be replicated. And they can easily be done in a span of 2 to 4 years. We're already investing in decentralized wastewater treatment plants. We're investing in lake rejuvenation. There are also other examples of gated communities, for example, who are coming together to reduce demand, to recharge groundwater, to recycle wastewater. There's several magnificent examples in Bangalore. There's one group of apartments which actually drinks their treated wastewater after blending it with groundwater. These need to be replicated. And I think the citizenry is right to do that replication without the fear factor.
Right. Well, as long as you can afford to have, the pools and the gardens, then that's great. But best to be prepared for what could be coming. Thank you so much, Vishwanath and Veena Srinivasan, for speaking with us on Primetime.